So today we're gonna be doing a little ban list discussion. I'm over here with Christian, who he's been topping a lot um, over the years. He's been playing this game. How old were you when you started playing this game?
I was 11. I started playing back for Storm of Ragnarok.
Okay, all right, yeah. So you've been playing like throughout the formats and everything, right?
Yeah.
All right, and yeah. So we've been wanting to have a ban list discussion for a long time. So I guess we'll do that today. So we have some pretty spicy cards that we want to talk about. So yeah, let's get started. So first off the bag, I guess branded fusion alongside gimmick puppet, because I've seen some people saying that branded fusion should be limited or banned, and that you should leave the puppet alone. But what do you think? Hello.
Oh, there you are. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah, you're
you
fine.
cut out for me. Um, I think branded fusion, unironically, is fine. I think that the deck puts up a very good amount of interaction. That's not necessarily degenerate until you get to things like gimmick puppet. I think gimmick puppet cards like that, Raw's Disciple, DDD Cerberus, cards that lock your opponent out of the game just by being up. Some that aren't even respondable to, i.e., Gimmick Puppet, are really more of the problems with the deck. I think the Chimera versions that people have been going to, some of them, I think most of them, from what I've seen, are choosing not to play Gimmick Puppet. I don't know if
Y-
if you've seen any other topping lists, but
Yeah,
I think
no, they
most of them
cut
are
it.
cutting it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think the Chimera version is most definitely the way to go for branded.
yeah.
But just because the Chimera version is doing better does not mean that Gimmick Puppet should be left alone. I think getting rid of it and getting rid of. Uh, I think banning Gimmick Puppet is good. Draw's Disciple is also another card that we could theoretically talk about. I think leaving Brand Fusion at 3 is fine. I
Okay.
mean, you can make an argument for putting it at 1 and 3. I think 1 and 3 are kind of the same thing only because you have things like opening and a luber or kit. You have so many ways to search it that there isn't really a big mathematical difference between 7 and 9 anymore. And so I think you can leave it at 3, you can put it at 1. Theoretically, it does not change the math. The only thing it matters is like recurability, where if you find a way to get rid of that branded fusion once and for all, then yeah, the deck's kind of dead. But I think leaving it at 3 is fine as long as you ban Giving Puppet.
I've heard some people say that branded fusion is kind of like the maxi of the TCG, where like you're forced to have Ash on your main deck as long as branded fusion is around. What do you think?
I think that argument is completely nowhere close. People saying that branded fusion requires you to have Maxi or you lose is such a warped argument that it's Maxi and branded fusion are nowhere close. I think there's a reason why Maxi's on the ban list, and
Yeah.
the reason why Maxi is nowhere close to branded fusion is nowhere close to the power level of Maxi. It's not even comparable.
Yeah, they're not even comparable. I agreed. Yeah, I I don't usually have a hard time against branded unless I completely brick, but I don't really think that deck is that hard to beat, if I'm being honest. But
And again, it's not even unfair in a lot of ways. It puts up a lot of interruptions and a lot of gas, but it doesn't do anything inherently unfair. And Gimmick Puppet is the only unfair part, regardless if it's the most played version or not. Get it out regardless.
yeah, that is true. So there's another card that's still around, and is the King Calamity, the Synchro that basically skips your turn. Um,
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people say that either Crimson Dragon or Hot Red need to go, and
yeah,
I think Crimson Dragon has some interesting text, but inherently the card locking you out of the game is Hot Red. Yes,
yeah,
Hot Red is a little bit harder, but if you ban, Crimson Dragon, people will just do formula synchron plays during, your turn. And it's the same thing that we had with Dagda and Scythe where they would just have to wait for your main phase and pop it. They would just go Hulk, Hyper Librarian, or not. They'd go Hulk, Wonder Magician, pop your Scythe, make a Baron, and effectively, that's basically the same thing. But you could just do it with Formula Synchron. Crimson Dragon is the same exact thing, but it just makes life easier. The problem card inherently is Hot Red, so just ban Hot Red. Like the card
Yeah.
basically has the same thing as Gimmick Puppet, but even worse, where it's just cards. Period. Where you might as well just
Yeah.
ban the card because it doesn't matter how good of a deck Synchron is. It it probably will not get hit based off of the deck not seeing viability, but it needs to get hit for these reasons because a lot of the cards that you see on this list still they should get and they probably will get hit. That Synchron might actually be a contender because of all these super high power decks that it lost to going away.
Yeah. Plus, like in Vanadium, they can even search like a counter trap card. So even if you have Droplet, uh, it's not gonna stop them from like activating Calamity, because they have the counter trap card to protect it. So yeah, I don't think that's pretty healthy for the game. Um, but yeah, so another card that is considered toxic by 50% of the population. It depends if you're on Kashtira or Flaunderies or any other deck. Shifter. What do you think of Shifter?
I think Shifter overall, you can look at Shifter and definitely say it is a problem. I think it is a. I think it's a problem. My only thing is that Shifter is not something you can guarantee in the deck like a Rise Heart, and so I think really the decks that can play Shifter are massively helped by it. But my thing is Shifter the reason why decks are winning? I think Shifter, yeah, a Rise Heart and Shifter kind of go in the same spot.
Yeah.
But I think a Rise Heart is such a strong card because it basically is Shifter anyways,
In the
but it's
extra
on
deck.
rings.
Yeah, it's in the
Yeah,
extra deck.
and it being entirely, accessible from the extra deck at any given time because of how, Kashtira basically is what makes the argument for a Rise Heart getting banned so much easier. That banning a Rise Heart, I think, is either you ban a Rise Heart or you limit Fenrir. And the reason why is because Fenrir is such a good card in the rest of the deck that yes, Unicorn is one card combo, but Fenrir is the reason why that card is like that deck is so recurable. Also, him being splashed in so many other engines is why he is so good. Like he can add himself. He's forms of spot removal that he should really only be able to be played in Kashtira because of how good of a card he is. Him being splashed on other archetypes is what I think is the problem with that card.
Yeah, I think if you limit it,
Shifter,
I think if you limit it, it's gonna stop people from splashing Fenrir. So I think limit.
and
Yeah.
and my thing is like if you have like I think banning a Rise Heart might be the only way to go
Yeah.
because looping it with things like I think Kashtira Prep is going to start coming back. Birth, Theosis getting it out, and a bunch of other ways that looping that copy of Fenrir, realistically speaking, if you can find a way to get rid of it permanently, is going to be an issue. I think the OCG had a really good hit for it by banning it entirely because if you think about it, that card is just stupid powerful. Are
Yeah.
people going to play one? I think Fenrir, people have already talked about how Fenrir is the new Pankratops, just
Yeah.
better anyways,
Yeah.
which I kind of think so too. And banning it outright, I think Fenrir will just turn into Pankratops where people are like, yeah, no, I can still just play one Fenrir.
Yeah.
Now, Pankratops is inherently a little bit better, bigger stat line, less restrictive summoning requirement, and it's more proactive of a card. I think Pankratops overall is a better card in some aspects, but Fenrir is way more splashable because of everything else that it does. I think limiting Fenrir is going to be really good for the deck, but I think
Yeah.
if you ban a Rise Heart, Kashtira will completely fall off the map. That's my only concern. I think a Rise Heart definitely has a reason to be banned and very quickly. But my only concern is that if Konami is wanting to keep Kashtira around, since it's really only been out like the full deck since Photon Hypernova, which is only at the beginning of this year, that they might not ban a Rise Heart yet. They might go after Fenrir and limit it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I agree with the banning of Rice Heart and limiting Fenrir.
Yeah,
Fenrir being able to add itself is just so insane because it makes it so that if even if you have something like I don't know, like torrential tribute, you're like, if I wipe now, they're just gonna special summon another Fenrir that they just added, So um, and it makes it so tricky against the Kashtira matchup because it makes it so you can never like get rid of the Fenrir they summon because you're like, what if they have another Kashtira, or do I let him add himself? It just puts so much pressure just a single Fenrir. So
Yeah, I think you can keep Shifter realistically. If you ban a Rise Heart, I think you can keep Shifter unlimited.
yeah,
Only like no changes. Only
yeah,
because a Rise Heart is the main reason why Kashtira is good. People
yeah.
are only playing Shifter because Kashtira does not care about it, and if Kashtira falls off the map, I think there is a very big argument for not really caring about Shifter anymore if the main deck that was playing it is gone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The next card I see on this list is Heart. You can
Yep.
put that card back. I mean, you could put it back to 3 right now and not care. But
Yeah.
realistically, it's going to go to 1 just because of how Konami works. You could put that card back to 3 and no one would care. The only card that actually matters when it comes to Orcust and that entire engine and back in 2019 is Mermaid.
Yeah,
And
Mermaid.
even then, I don't even think I don't think full Orcust combo in quotations is even that good anymore. It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I agree. So, I mean, so do we think they can come back to three harp? And I don't even
Uh,
think it will make a
it
change, right?
can.
Yeah,
Oh, it can. It won't come back to 3 immediately. It will go to 1, but it can come back to 3 today, no problem.
yeah. Okay. All right.
Honestly, I actually texted Yada earlier and I said, hey, we might want to talk about the Zodiac cards.
Yeah.
I see that Zeus is not on the list, but like I
Oh
think,
yeah.
oh, is Zeus on the list?
No, no,
So
no. It's not. Yeah.
I think that if you were to put Zeus at 1 and you can unlimit all of the Zodiac cards. The reason why is because Zeus really was a problem in Zoo
Hmm.
only because of the amount of times you can make a Zeus. Now, yes, they would be running cards like Pot of Avarice and all of that, but the amount of ways that you can get rid of a Zeus nowadays in today's meta is very easy. Yes, Zodiac is a stun deck, but it's a little bit easier of a stun deck to really play against than an actual stun deck in a sense. And there was not really anything unfair that pure Zodiac was doing anyways before Dryden got banned again. Like,
Yeah.
yes, Zeus was the most degenerate part of that, but
Yeah.
if you limit Zeus and you prevent people from remaking Zeus's over and over and over again, I
Yeah.
think you can put Barrage and Dryden back to 1
Okay.
like very easy.
Okay. So you think Zeus
Um,
should have been in the limited section too, alongside Trident and Barrage?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think I think if you just limit, also that I think limiting Zeus is actually a good thing too. One, because it also makes it so that Xyz decks like Pearly or Kashtira or other decks only have one, or Sprite only have one copy. So
Yeah.
it's not, it's not like, oh, I can make 2 in one time. It makes you think, hey, is this the best time to make my board wipe monster? Especially considering that we're in such a I wouldn't we're in a half board breaker hand trap format in my opinion, where that Zeus, if you don't have a way to recur it, if you make it at the wrong time where you know you're not going to win the game, cool,
Yeah.
you just lost a very valuable resource.
Yeah. No, you're right about that. So Dryden is a pretty crazy card, but uh, I do agree that the main issue going second is like having like three Zeus on the extra deck, and it just becomes such an oppressive matchup because you know they can just make a second Zeus the following turn, and a third one
Yeah,
the turn after that. So um, I guess speaking, since you kind of mentioned Sprite, so okay, so we have a couple of things right here. So gigantic Sprite and um, Ibly. So
I
which one do you think
I
is the
think
issue?
uh, realistically speaking, it's Ibly. Like
Mm,
if you want to say that there is a problem between them, Ibly is the issue.
yeah.
It's the same problem that Cash Tira did, but on a different scale. Of Ibly requires you to warp your to warp deck building philosophies of like, oh, in a format where Sprite is the best deck or a good deck, that I still have to think about playing a Link Karibo, Lingaribo, or whatever, not Link Karibo, but Lingaribo, or whatever Cyber's, link to out Ibly. I don't think Gigantic or any of the Sprite cards There might be one sprite card that I do have an issue with, but Gigantic is nowhere close to being a problem. I think Ibly is the same problem as Gimmick Puppet. Now, it's not immediate and not a lingering effect like Gimmick Puppet, but it still warps that deck building philosophy
Yeah.
where it's Sprite and Ibly hasn't been topping all the time, but I still think that having that out of the meta, especially going into a new ban list, where if they don't hit it, Sprite could still be a really good deck with Ibly still unbanned, and that could basically just be your new Gimmick Puppet. And
Yeah.
Sprite inherently is a really good engine, and we could see the rise of Runic Sprite again, considering it died in Dune. But I think Ibly just needs to fall on the nail for a little bit because it doesn't need to be in the game.
Yeah, it's such an oppressive card, especially because I mean you need so many things in the extra deck now. Like I don't play Lingerie because I don't have the space in most of my decks, which I'm like,
Exactly.
like a lot of in a lot of decks. Like let's say I'm playing something like Infernoble. Like sure I may have space to put in a Lingerie, but then like what is that gonna do? A Cybers Link One? Like what am I gonna do with that on my end board? You know, it's not gonna do anything.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really benefit a lot of people. It's in decks that can't even go into link summons. Like, how are they gonna get rid of it?
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, like I think that's really all you have to say for those. I mean,
yeah,
Gigantic is nowhere close to being a problem. The next couple of cards I see on the list are Meow Meow.
yeah,
I was convinced after seeing some replays from like MVP's Masochist ban list tournament and other stuff where Meow Meow was not really Meow Meow got banned because of everything else's. Like Prank Kids was really good, but I think that Prank Kid was only good as a deck because of everything else that the deck played with. And I think in this format right now that it can come back to one just fine. I don't think there's a super strong strategy for it. Now, considering what Konami hits on the rest of the ban list, yes, this deck dies to one ash just like Branded does, which can make a cause for concern. But I think that double Raigeki in this format, if you don't have an answer for it, is actually kind of big. And so that is one cause where I'm like, I'd be okay with it going to 0 or 1. But I think if you want to make that deck playable and you want decks to be around, Meow Meow to 1 is fine because I don't really
yeah,
think Prank Kids is going to be doing anything new than what it already was. And considering how far the format has developed in this last, I think, 2 years since Meow Meow has been banned, that it's okay to bring it back to 1.
yeah. I'm actually curious. Like, I want Konami to bring this back to one. Just simply, like, I want to see like where how it would contend against like Kashtira, Branded, Pearly, like all those decks. Um, I don't know how. I feel like it has a bad Pearly matchup because they need their body to stick on the field, and like Nor can just put it to the
Oh
bottom of
yeah,
the deck.
yeah.
Yeah,
You normal summon one kid and you just
yeah,
go effect
yeah,
spin. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's safe to come back to one. Um, I don't know about multiple. I think that would be a little bit too much, but one is good enough.
I
Um,
mean, one is really all that mattered. You only needed the second one when you lived past turn 2. That's
yeah,
it.
yeah. So okay, so this one, a lot of people have been talking about it recently because I think Ryan, you won a regional. He was playing like triple Cooklock on the main deck. Uh, yeah, what do you think about those turn zero hand rips or eradicators? I mean, turn one hand rips or eradicators.
I
Um,
think that, in like, we can talk about all these cards really quickly.
yeah,
Coup Clock, Eradicator, D-Barrier, and Red Reboot. We can talk about them all really quick.
yeah,
Coup Clock, like, Eradicator, banned. D-Barrier, banned. I think Eradicator shutting you off 2 or 3 turns, that is a lingering effect that really has no negation turn 1 is absolutely stupid. Lingering effects like that are just not fun to play against. D-Barrier is the exact same way, where I knew some people who were playing it in Kashtira against Pearly, where you just flip it and go, I don't care about my Arise Heart if all I have to do is just prevent you from summoning Pearlies. Like, yes, that deck is a little bit more dead now, but considering that the extra deck is so focused on right now, that there's not a lot of tribute summon decks like Flu or True Draco or whatever, that D-Barrier is such a great card that you might as well just ban it. It gets played in very, degenerate strategies, again, it's a lingering effect that does not create any kind of interaction with the game. Red Reboot, you can just leave banned. That card is, again, in a spot where it prevents decks whose entire strategy and function is doing that. Back when this card, before it got banned, it was because of Eldritch. Now, if you think like Eldritch and stun decks, but if you look at the trap decks that we have now, Neo Trap Trick, Eldritch not really as a stun deck, but Labyrinth and decks like that. If you really think about it, on them unbanning Red Reboot would just be, we don't want you to play trap decks anymore. Maybe trap decks have been getting too good. Red Reboot is a little too good for not enough setup. There's almost no setup to do it anyways. So Red Reboot is just, it doesn't help the diversity of the game because it shuts down every trap deck from even being good, considering that if you wanted to have a chance against this deck, you have to open Judgment. There's no way you can counter that card unless you're playing Wiretap, and it's not 2013. Coup Clock, on the other hand, I think is one of those cards where it sets up the degenerate cards, but realistically speaking, if you ban things like Eradicator and D-Barrier, or the cards that already are problems in other decks, not just like trap decks like Labyrinth, Coup Clock is entirely fine. Again, what is Coup Clock doing on turn 0, turn 1 or 2 that is very degenerate? That's not a floodgate or some kind of blowout card like Eradicator, like D-Barrier. I think you can leave Coup Clock at 3, but if you ban these 2 floodgates, the deck is inherently, now you might have to ban more viruses, or you can get into the same argument as, well, Coup Clock is the new Hulk for trap cards, like all the viruses and stuff like that. And so I can see that argument, but it doesn't really matter when the entire deck turns on all the viruses anyways.
Yeah.
So the viruses are just something we have to deal with anyways. I think Coup Clock is fine, but we just need to get rid of the biggest ones right now. And pulling off a 3-card combo for a virus turn 1 is very hard, in my opinion. It's low probability. Yes, it can happen, but also it depends on what deck you're playing against and what is good in the meta. Where not Eradicator doesn't hit every single deck, but it still has a wide range. Where the argument for Ibly and those deck building philosophies are a little bit different. I think Coup Clock is okay, but if viruses and lab do become more prevalent this coming format, I think you can justify banning it.
Yeah, because I'm glad you brought that Hulk example, because it is in a way like Labyrinth is putting a lot of traps on the map. Like, I don't think we've had this conversation about normal trap cards like in a long time, right? Like, because Eradicate, I mean, like the virus cards have been on for a long time, and sure they've been a problem in the past because people like hard draw them, or like they set them with like, I don't know, Curious or something. But I think people are talking about like the normal trap cards more now than ever before because of the Labyrinth cards.
And that's kind of a problem, is that the viruses were definitely made for that kind. They were made for a slower kind of Yu-Gi-Oh, where it did not really matter on turn 1. Eradicator was printed, I think, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was back in like the GX era. But if you look at all the new viruses, that they're not based off of really strong categories where it's like spells and traps or monsters above 15 or below 15. Like Full Force and Grinning Grave are based off of defense and something else respectively. Where those are a little bit more non-specific, where Eradicator just flat out calls 2 types of cards, and you can just call either one depending on what it is.
Yeah, so it came out in 2007, Force of the Breaker?
Eradicator? Yeah, Force of the Breaker. That sounds about right.
Yeah. Dang.
Something on this list that... some of these cards I think take almost no explanation. Magispector Kirin is something that you could probably bring off the list just fine. I mean, the card is completely irrelevant now. I don't think Pendulum's doing anything. Now, the other card on Pendulum's list is Electromite. I
Electromite, yeah.
think Electromite, personally, can come back to one.
Okay.
Pendulum needs all the help it can get. Now, if there is some just absolutely bonkers Pendulum strategy that's not Draco Slayers, then yes, there's a little bit to worry about. But because Draco Slayers is not even topping events anyways, and the power of Pendulum is so low due to them hitting so many cards, we have Skull Preparat and everything. I don't know if modern Pepe is really going to be that much of a concern. Maybe Electromite is the one card that turns it into an FTK, but I don't. Pendulum hasn't been good anyway, so bringing Electromite back for a format to see what it does probably isn't such a bad thing, considering that since Electromite has been banned, I think it was 2019 or maybe a little bit earlier. I don't exactly remember that. There's been more changes to what types of hand traps and what board breakers that we have, that I think we can be okay with bringing Electromite back to one, that more removal and more non-specific things have been here.
Yeah, and pendulums haven't had a spotlight in a long time. Like they keep getting support, they keep getting new cards, but I don't know if it's an outdated mechanic, so they kind of do need some good help, like Electromite coming back.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
mhm.
a Colossus also kind of goes in the same category. Colossus is so Thunder Dragon Colossus
Oh
is
yeah,
so, yeah. I think Colossus is such a polarizing card because of how many you were able to set up in a deck that was undoubtedly what people thought to be the best deck. Thunder Dragon has such Colossus has such great protection in the forms of just banishing things without activating, and it's droll the whole time. Now, in that scenario, yes, it's a little bit to worry about. There's not a really strong Thunder archetype, and yes, like Colossus can bring back Thunder Dragon as a somewhat tier 2.5 playable strategy, but there's it being a splashable card for something like Nemesis Corridor in specific decks, I think is not really a reason enough for it to be on the list any longer. Yes, Droll is such a strong card, but like Nemesis Corridor is not searchable for like specific things, and I don't think Thunder Dragon is going to be any more playable than what it already is, anyways, with Colossus. And so I think you can bring back Colossus just fine, because I don't think there's a playable Thunder archetype off the top of my head that actually will fulfill its own requirements without Corridor. And so
yeah,
I think bringing it back to one is okay. Yes, people are going to complain that it's Droll on legs that has protection, but if that was the reason why, a lot of people would not have been figuring out things like Cyberstein OTK unless you had to search it. And Cyberstein was searchable for a lot of FTKs for different reasons, but Nemesis Corridor isn't. And I think just bringing it back to one is fine.
yeah. I think so as well. I mean, there's so many ways to out it. Book of Moon, Droplet. Like there's just countless ways to out it.
There's a
So
lot of
yeah,
effect removal, yeah,
yeah,
and I kind of like Electromite, Colossus, and Masterpiece are kind of cards that I think can all go back to one. True Draco was only playable during 2019 as a halfway meta call killer strategy because of Masterpiece and its Monarchs Erupt skill drained lockdown format. Where I think skill drain should also be on should also be on this list. That it should be banned. But I think Masterpiece is a little bit of an outdated card now. Yes, it's just Drident that's unaffected by certain cards, but due to the way Yu-Gi-Oh has been getting in this last year and a half, really, that different types of removal for cards are becoming so much more available. Back in 2019, that really the only form of trap removal for any of these monsters would be like Imperm, and that's it. And so making a masterpiece with monsters and spells was really, really strong. But we're also in a format where one pop is not enough anymore. Yes, it can be True Draco can be backed up by all the traps, but I didn't like. I don't feel like Masterpiece was the one thing holding Draco. Like Masterpiece is not the one thing holding True King or True Draco from coming back into play. And so if you bring back Masterpiece, I think the deck will be about the same amount of playable, if not a little bit more of a interactive rogue stun strategy, the same way that something on the cell, like something that Zodiac is as well. The same kind of rogue stun kind of strategy. I think if you bring it back, it's fine.
Yeah. And we don't even, I don't think right now we have any like good stun decks. I don't even consider Labyrinth a stun deck. That's more like a combo trap deck.
It feels like combo stun, but even then,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like stun because
Yeah.
it's not preventing you from really doing anything.
Yeah.
But at the same time, 2950 is not a hard stat to clear anymore because a lot of boss monsters has just been printed as,
3,000.
3000. And yeah, and a lot of boss monsters are either recurable or have secondary effects that can do something that sets you up to just remove Masterpiece again anyways. And so, like back when Masterpiece got banned, it was really hard to out 2950 because that monster also probably did not have protection. So I think 2950 and Masterpiece being what it is, I think it's okay. Like I
Yeah.
think it's okay to bring it back.
Yeah, now we have like Underworld, the Goddess in the extra deck that, you can just get rid of it if you really need to.
Yeah.
So here's this one, MX Saber Invoker. This one is gonna come out in Master Duel. It's gonna get released. Um, and people were worried at first that it was gonna like crack the game or anything, but then people started looking at the targets, and there's not that many good targets that it could summon. It's
The
like
thing is,
Mhm.
go ahead.
I think it's just mainly good on Madolchi. Uh, that's what I think, but
See,
yeah.
my thing with Invoker is that it's fine, but it directly is able to help set up some wombo combo deck that if you leave uninterrupted kills your opponent into the sun. But I feel like that card's only good in Master Duel because it's a best of one format and you can if your opponent just doesn't like open up Maxi, Ash, or whatever, you can wombo combo them into the sun. I think in current format that there might be a little bit more of a might be a little bit more of a concern depending on what people are able to brew up with current lists. I think bringing it back to one is fine because there's not a really strong level 3 engine currently that is not just Terror Top Takatom Board Turbo. But I think bringing it back to one is fine because there's not a lot it really sets up anymore, especially in a format, again, filled with hand traps and board breakers, where a lot of things can just be answered by your Dark Rulers or one effect negate Dark Hole, that kind of idea.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
obviously, this is just a all these cards can come back kind of thing, like kind of list where it's not really a lot of these are debatable, and a lot of these might not happen on the next list, which is okay. But just these ideas and thoughts behind the cards is really what matters when it comes to it. But having all these changes, let's say this list was like implemented tomorrow,
yeah,
the reason why Konami, and I saw this on a Joshua Schmitz like clip, that the reason why Konami does not just have a absolute, what's the word? Absolute genocide of the format where they just take out every bad card that's ever been is because it looks bad for the game. Where if you have a ban list of like 40 cards, it's like, yeah, no wonder like we had to do all of this. It just makes the game look bad, and so they're really just trying to get rid of the biggest threats to the format because they can't really do a lot without damaging the reputation of the game. That's not a great reason, and I don't like it, but that's the only reason that you can think of for a company that's trying to make money.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. Um, I do think that TCG players are better at combo decks because they're not. We're used to now playing around Maxi, so we usually. I mean, we proved it in Worlds, right? But just a little
Well,
banter. But
Also, Maxi should probably be on this list. No,
Yeah.
it should probably still stay banned. Like
Yeah.
Maxi is not a card. Maxi is a card that either needs to be at 0 or at 3,
Yeah.
and then that entirely starts making a discussion more of how am I going to play around these cards more than anything else.
Yeah. Knight playing Master Duel. Oh man. I hope one day Konami just says let's ban Maxi and Master Duel because it will help the
I
game
think
a
it's
lot.
coming.
Yeah.
I think it's coming.
That what makes you think that?
Aroma
Oh
Seraphine.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So just to touch on this real quick. Yes, you can say that I'm just saying Joshua Schmidt's angle, but them banning more combo centric cards, things like Block Dragon. I don't remember the full list off the top of my head, but they're banning more combo centric cards
Yeah.
that directly enable combo decks to be really good, or they're like those cards are the Rongo Nimiad and Block
Mural.
Dragon and what was the other one?
Merlin, the tier limit.
Kind of. But like things like Rongo and Block Dragon,
Yeah.
really oppressive cards that they decided to leave legal because the philosophy is, well, if Maxi is around, no one's going to play these really busted cards because they're going to lose hard to Maxi. Is, in my opinion, if you start banning these cards, banning Maxi is an easier task to do because then it's what's the biggest problem card in this format now that all these other combo centric cards are dead? It's Maxi.
Yeah.
And leaving that argument aside, I think Maxi should have been banned a while ago, regardless of Rongo and all that being limited or being legal anyways. But that kind of idea, once you start banning all these combo centric cards, Maxi is an easier take to just ban entirely.
Yeah. That's a good conspiracy theory right there. I'm hoping you're right. So, but yeah, Jasmine. So, this is the LP of plant decks. Basically, in the future, if they get any more support, this is gonna be able to summon it. So, do you think this is a problem? I don't know. There's the Booth won yesterday, the locals with Rika and Avalon. That's the first thing he said. He's like, this card needs to be banned. But what do you think?
I don't think so.
You don't think
The reason why is because I always make this analogy for people that plant is just dragon. Like, really, Sun Avalon Rika is the same thing as Dragon Link in the way that both decks are playing parts of the engine that do not directly get to each other without a connection point. And so for Sun Avalon, it's Aroma like Jasmine gets you to Rika, and then Jasmine from Rika gets you to Sun Avalon. But also for Dragon Link, a lot of the deck's connection points are Magnamut, Dragon Ravine, and Romulus by extension, and then maybe like one or two other cards. But really, those main connection points, if you're not able to get to those connection points, then inherently the deck is not as strong as it needs to be. And in a format full of hand traps, I think that's why these decks are not really coming up as much. One, because a lot of people they're not deck building for Synchron anymore because they know the deck's not that great. But with all these hand traps running around, I think that these cards die a little bit easier. Now, Magnamut, on the other hand, I think you should put at 1. He's a little too splashable. But Jasmine, on the other hand, that card's not once per turn. And so, I don't remember if all of it is once per turn. I'll have to look it up. But
let's see. If you I think that the adding is not. I actually don't know exactly, if I'm being honest. So, it says you contribute one monster is correct points to special summon one plant monster.
Yeah, so the E-Telly part or the Lone Fire part is once per turn, but the adding is not. Okay. And so that's really what the deck is going for. It wants the Lone Fire effect, but at the same time, it's not live or die based off of that because you can just summon another one with the one that got negated if you even negated it in the first place, and then add something like Mudan for the Rika side. That you can inherently see that as a problem. But I think Jasmine and by extension Magnamut, I think Magnemite should go to 1 because he's a little too generic for that entire archetype. But Jasmine, I think you can leave it 3. I don't know if everything in the deck is really everything in the Rika deck is something to worry about, just because we have so many board breakers now. Where it seems like that Wombo combo deck, Rika kind of seems like Synchron with a little bit more follow up. Where if you break the board once, it's not super hard for Rika to set up, but the board will never be the same again.
Yeah,
And
because they go
so,
through all the extra deck. Yeah.
yeah, and it's hard to loop the extra deck in Rika Sun Avalon if you even do it at all. And so I think that that angle is a little bit more concerning. Magnemite, on the other hand, he's a little too generic for the deck and for other parts for it to even be remotely arguable if he should still be at 3 or 1. Now, a lot of people put Druiswarm and Magnemite in the same spot. I think Druiswarm you can leave at 3 and he's fine. Magnemite, on the other hand, he's a little too generic for a lot of people to splash in the other decks, and then he directly searches Druiswarm. Yeah. Then you can make the argument, well, at some points, is 3 Druiswarm and 1 Magnemite the same thing as 3 Magnemite, 1 Druiswarm? No, only because of why Dragon Link exists. And people are playing things like Bestials for things like Branded, not really Pearly, but Branded, Dragon Link itself, maybe some Lab, depending on Math Mech, but again, that card, that deck's not really performing that great anyways. Yeah. But I think Magnemite's a little too generic for any deck to play in general to search things like Druiswarm that also counters others, where I think putting Magnemite at 1 is a little bit more indicative of a card that should only be in a Dragon deck.
Yeah, I mean, Bestials, I'm not gonna lie, they're oppressive, especially if you play a light or dark deck, it becomes so insane. But I do think Magnemite is the most broken out of all of them, especially because of Dragon Link.
And this is kind of I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I think that if you're going to leave Gimmick Puppet unbanned, you have to leave Magnemite at 3 because Bestials really are the only way of countering the Gimmick Puppet lock that is not Ghost Bell. Yes, there's DD Crow, but DD Crow is not. It doesn't get you enough advantage, and Ghost Bell doesn't do that by extension too, to really counter the fact that Bestials are just better in every way. But I think banning Gimmick Puppet and putting Magnemite at 1 saves both sides of that argument.
Yeah. I don't see why you would pick DD Crow. DD Crow is only good versus Pearly, but aside from that, the Bestials just do a better job than DD Crow. So speaking of Pearly, I know you're a Pearly player yourself. You used to play Sprite Pearly and Pure Pearly. So what do you think Sleepy and Nor, where do you think they should go?
There's a little bit of a problem with Nor. Sleepy should definitely go to 1. That is, you can put that card at 1 real quick.
Yeah.
Drawing a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 6 off of a 1.5 card combo is absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing to argue about that. My thing is that people are also calling for Nor to get either limited or banned. I think limited is a fine reasoning, but I think if you're going to limit Nor, I think realistically speaking, you can bring back Delicious to 3. I think that realistically speaking, if you're going to limit Nor, because that is the most toxic interaction of the deck, it makes the deck easier to play against. Pearly has a way to loop that Nor in the form of Yeep, which I think is a good way to make sure that the player has to kind of cycle their biggest part of interaction, but Nor by itself also facilitates people needing to play things like Kaijus or Herald of the Abyss. Now, other decks can be playing things like Kaijus. They're never going to play Herald of the Abyss for any other deck other than exactly X Pearly Noir. But Kaijus can be argued for with other decks. But if you're going to limit Nor, I think you can bring back Delicious to 3 because it helps the deck not entirely tank off of this one ban list, and it gives them an easier way to set this back up. Yes, there are easier ways to yes, it's an easier way to set up Nor because now you're back to 3 delicious, but that's what that deck needs to stay playable, because having 3 sleep or having 1 sleepy, 1 delicious, the deck, I wouldn't say crumbles, but the consistency is just gone after that point. And it's not the consistency to do well anymore, it's the consistency to play after turn 1 or even play to win. That who cares how well the deck is consistent, but it's not going to be able to put up the power anymore. And I think putting Nor to 1 and 3 delicious is a decent way to hit that deck.
Yeah, and I think that should have been the ban list, like in the first place. Like I'm surprised they hit delicious instead of sleepy. Like they should, if they would have started off by limiting sleepy and leaving delicious at 3, I think it would have been in a better spot.
Well,
But right now it's pretty broken. Hmm.
well, I don't think I think limiting sleepy wasn't really that much of an issue because baby Nor wasn't out yet. Now some people can make the argument that 2 and 1 or 3 and 1 Nor is not really that big of a difference. And sure, that argument is a little bit valid, but in the terms of Yeep, I think the only point of interaction that actually makes Pearly playable that's not a splashable engine, if it ever was one, is the fact that Nor is around. Nor is the only thing to that deck's name that is not X Pearly Happiness, and that card is not inherently playable because it's not a quick effect. That Nor is the only way that deck is playable, so you have to at least leave it at 1. Yes, you can play Plump Control, but that's not a way to play that deck, and it's not sustainable for the strategy long term. So I think having 1 Nor that you have to loop in other ways is a good way to do that.
Fair point. Fair point. Now we're gonna jump over to a deck that's a little bit more toxic than Nor, and it's Runic. Runic, and I'm not even gonna mention all the different Runics there are. There are Fur Hires, Live Twins, Sprite,
Oh yeah,
everything. Yeah. So, but I think the main offenders are Tip and Fountain. Where do you think they should go?
I I think realistically speaking, if you limit Fountain, you can leave Tip at 3. But if you leave Fountain, you cannot leave Tip. I think that those cards are inherently too strong together because of Tip being the auto, rota for any spell in the deck, and Fountain being so recurable that having 1 Fountain is way harder of a game than having 2 or 3 Fountain. And that's just because of things like Cosmic Cyclone or inherent spot removal removes it in a zone that Jerry cannot get to, which is banishing. And people are already playing things like Cosmic for spot removal anyways, that once you get rid of that 1 Fountain, the Runic deck becomes entirely way more fair and balanced to play against.
Yeah.
Tip, you can leave it 3 as long as you limit Fountain. Now, you can limit Tip if you want.
Or do you think semi-limited would be the sweet spot?
I think semi-limiting Tip would. Yeah, I like 2 Tip. Tip is a little bit too searchable of a card for it to feel fair at 3. It's okay if you leave it at 3, in my opinion, if you do 1 Fountain. But I think semi-limiting Tip is at least the minimum that you should do for this engine, just because of how abusable that card is with Fountain. But Fountain needs to go to 1, just so that engine is still at least playable in some kind.
Yeah, and it's gonna be harder for them to be able to draw 6 with 1 Fountain. I mean, they could still do it, but they'll have to have like the perfect hand to be able to do something like that. Because they'll have to add it back from graveyard. They basically have to open like all Runic spells. But
well,
right.
That's the Runic player's dream, isn't it?
Oh yeah, that is true.
Some of these older cards are on the list that we can just kind of knock out now. Chicken Game is a card that I'm a little hesitant to really say anything on. Yes, it literally creates a chicken game where you either have to find a way to remove it entirely by either just blowing it up by its own effect. Let me double check this card real quick. Yeah, like you can either choose to remove it through some kind of outside effect or blow it up by its own effect. But inherently the only thing you're going to be doing is just activating this card, paying 1,000 for an upstart, and then your opponent either has to, you know, remove it through some kind of removal, doesn't really matter, or pay the 1,000 to blow it up. And now, I don't think Chicken Game would be splashable in any real strategy unless it's something like a stun deck or something else.
Like Exodia or
Only
something like
because,
that.
yeah, where it's like I think so many meta decks are so focused on wanting to kill your opponent really fast anyways, that having that restriction on Chicken Game is a little annoying. Now, some decks could probably make use of the fact that they're like, oh, I'll just draw one, summon a monster, blow up my own Chicken Game, and then kill you. Sure, that's fine. But I don't think decks now have some of the space to make Chicken Game really good. Yes, you could play it in like a trap deck like Labyrinth or Trap Trick, but I think it's not as good as playing another engine card, if that makes sense.
Okay. So do you think it will be safe to come back?
I mean, you can put, do the Konami method and put it at 1. I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's okay to come back to 1. No one's gonna play one Chicken Game. People are only gonna play it at 3 because it's a very easy it's a very easy draw one. Spellbook of Judgment. I think you could just what is that currently? I
It's
think
a
it's at
one.
1.
Yeah, it's a one.
Yeah, just bring it back to 2. I mean, just pull the Konami method. It's not doing anything.
Yeah.
No one's summoning Jowgen with spellbook monsters. It's not, it's not Dragon Ruler format anymore. Who cares? I don't really think Judgment's going to do anything. What's the other card on here that you can? Oh, Misk. Dragons haven't been doing anything. You can bring it back to 3. It's fine.
Yeah.
I think you can skip the whole 2 portion and bring it back to 3.
Yeah.
Just because dragons inherently are an engine that, yes, Misk is a little bit unfair, but also dinos inherently need that help anyways. And yes, Misk is already searchable halfway Misk is already halfway searchable to hell and back anyway. So you might as well just put it back to 3 just to make dragons have a little bit more have a little bit easier of a time in the sunshine.
I'm surprised they didn't like bring it back to 2 or 3 when the new Dino stuff came back. I think Konami like missed a shot there.
Well, and in the sense, the problem with Misk is either you go second and they only need one anyways, or they're going first, setting up the board, and then going second, they have the second copy or the third copy or whatever, and they drop it before you can do anything. That's where I think people will have the problem with Misk. Where if it stayed at 1, that's a perfectly fine spot to leave it. But I think realistically you can bring it back to 3 because I think 1 and 2 Misk is a very big difference. 2 and 3 are not. So if it stays at 1, that's perfectly fine. I completely understand it. But I think you can bring it back to 3 because 3 and 2 are not a big difference anymore. And you might as well just do that just so Dino players have less things to complain about. I mean, really, it's fine.
Okay.
Samorg is one of those cards. I'm trying to find a parallel here. Now that its main offender is banned in the form of Barrier Statue for Tri Brigade, the card's fine to bring back. Now, you can make the argument that having a monster that prevents you from targeting doesn't really set up a great way for the game to be played, but it only prevents wing beast monsters that it points to from being targeted. Barrier Statue is already banned, and who cares if you can't target an Apex Avion when, again, the best removal cards don't target. So I think it's okay to bring it back to 1.
Yeah, if this comes back to 1, I'm gonna be playing Lyreless Tri Brigade again. They haven't been doing anything, so yeah.
Engage. My thing with Engage is that Striker has not. I hate Striker with a passion, but Striker has not been putting up any results where Striker, I think, needs to be worried about in the long term. What is it at 2?
Yeah, it's a 2 right now.
Yeah, just there's not a difference between 2 or 3 engage.
Just
Just
3.
bring it back to 3.
Yeah.
Striker hasn't been doing anything. I hate Striker personally. I have a vendetta against it because of someone at locals, but just bring it back to 3. It's okay. Now the rest of these cards on this list are a little bit of an issue. Not really Gazelle. Bring back Gazelle to 3. He's like, Gazelle's fine
Oh
at
yeah,
3.
you got my
Salad
vote there.
needs all the help. Yeah, Salad needs. I wouldn't say it needs all the help it can get, but with the new support, it's something for people to go back to the deck a little bit easier. And in my opinion, it's the same thing as Misk, not because of how broken it is, but just because there are so many ways to search it now that there's not really a care in the world for whether there's 1 or 3.
Yeah.
There are so many searchable ways where if you're worried about the math of like, oh, well, I have, this many chances to find a Gazelle, it's like, okay, who cares? Yeah. Gazelle is not that broken of a card to begin with. Yeah. So just bring it back to 3. It's not setting up anything unfair. Just bring it back to 3. Now, the rest of the cards on this list are kind of a little bit problematic. Yeah. The Dragon Rulers, these last 2 are realistically the issue. I'm pretty sure Title is the foolish, right?
Yeah,
the foolish burial one.
Yeah,
Title is foolish. That is a card where
Tier Limit will be playing this.
Oh, 100%. But at the same time, I think that Tier Limit can't make use of this super well because they'd have to pitch specifically Rhino, King of the Swamp, or what's a water what's another water they're playing?
Kaiju. Gamma Seal.
Sure, pitch a Gamma Seal. That's fine, and it's for cost anyways.
Yeah.
So inherently, Title I felt like was something you could bring back a little bit earlier, especially since all the Tier Limit monsters that actually fuse are darks. But who cares? Because they're going for cost. They're not going for effect.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to send a Tier Limit for effect, but you're not going to be able to proc both. Like this card would actually be a problem.
But sending a Guido or Kelbeck?
Okay. I mean, realistically speaking, that's sure. Okay. Send a Guido or Kelbeck. I mean, you need the help. Like, Tier Limits has not been putting up the results recently after Dune, and it's a tier. I think tier right now is like a tier 2 deck. There's tier 1, 1.5, tier 2.
Yeah.
I think tier right now is a tier 2 deck because it does not have the amount of names it has anymore. Yeah. I think both Title and Redox can come back because there are not super strong attribute specific strategies that are water and earth specifically to make use of these. Redox you can make a little bit of a concern about for something like Synchron because I know a lot of the deck has some earth depending on what variant you're playing, but an Inherent Reborn is really strong. Do you know a deck out there that's playing a lot of earths that this deck would actually make use of?
Madolchi,
but like that's not even like meta relevant.
Yeah, so like a meta relevant one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh boy, in my Kashtira deck, I'm going to special summon Fenrir, hard draw the 1 Redox, pitch my other copy of Fenrir to resummon the other Fenrir. Oh boy. I think Redox is fine. And you can make the concern of, oh, but it's a dragon. It's searchable off of Magnamut and it's searchable off of others.
Yeah.
And inherently, Dragon Link's not really playing a lot of non-light and dark, non-chaos typing cards anyways. So realistically speaking, I think Redox, all the Dragon Rulers were fine to come back to 1 a while ago. And I think that's just the easiest way to put it. Prosperity. How do you feel about that?
Oh man, that's...
I've been talking my head off, and Prosby is a card that I want to hear your opinion on.
Okay, so I
need to shut up for a little bit.
Okay, so in my opinion, this card is absolutely broken. Like, going first, Going second. Going second, you start off with 6 cards, so you already have a high chance of seeing like the board breakers or uh, whatever, like a starter. Now on top of that, you prosperity, you dig for another 6 cards. You're basically seeing 12 cards going second. That seems kind of broken to me, especially if you're running like board breakers like Dark Ruler, Kaiju, Lava Golem, Lightning Storm. Like it almost puts you in a scenario where like if they prosper 6 going second, you have to ash like no questions asked. Especially like
Yeah.
if you're playing Pearly, you don't want them to see a Kaiju or the Kirikara. Um, and going first, like post side deck, the chances of seeing like one of the 3D barriers they're gonna be in the side deck, it's gonna be pretty high. If they're gonna be seeing, especially like decks like Kashtiria that go through their whole combo. They have a Rice Heart. Then they dig for 6. They already thinned out their deck by like 10 cards or something. So now they're gonna be digging 6 in the 30 cards they have left in their deck.
Yeah.
Um, I mean the 30 cards they have left in their deck. The chances of them seeing those like auto wins go up. Like I mean I would want it to be banned. I don't think Konami would ban it, especially since it's getting reprinted. But I do think maybe seeing the approach that Master Duel did and limiting it might be the right approach. Um,
I think the biggest problem with Prosperity is that it's so good in decks that can not care about a half of their extra deck.
yeah,
Decks like Unchained, Pearly, Cash, and like any kind of trap
Flunderies,
deck,
yeah, trap decks.
Flunder. It's a little too good. It's a little too generic. It's a little too enabling. And yes, like every time in Cash, I would sit there, I'd go full combo, I would prosby, find some kind of interaction for my opponent while I'm going first, and then equip something. But that's just Cash.
Yeah,
And then in Unchained, it's like, realistically speaking, I don't need all of my extra deck. I can get rid of 6 cards very easy because, again, a lot of these decks that can play Prosby have flex spots because not
yeah,
all of it is necessary. Because I like to pick decks based off of what I like to call, if something is strong in both its main deck and its extra deck.
yeah,
A deck like Kashtira is a really good example where everything in its extra deck plays well with everything in its main deck, but also everything in the main deck is just good enough as it is. Like if you look at, Fenrir, Unicorn, Scareclaw, Tear Cash, all the spells that
ogre,
you
yeah,
don't need the extra. Yeah, you
yeah,
don't need all the extra deck in Cash to make the deck okay. But having the extra deck just makes the deck better.
yeah,
But all the decks that are playing Prosby can play both well and its main and its extra, and don't require each other to make it really good. Unchained kind of needs its extra deck a little bit because most of the interaction comes from its extra deck monsters. Where it's like, okay, we don't need a lot of extra deck monsters in Unchained to make it work, but it's still a card where it's like half of mine is flex spots that I can just directly enable off of Prosperity, anyways. So I think taking the Master Duel approach with it and limiting
yeah,
it is a fine thing. Yes, it makes it a sacky one of, but
yeah,
it's not a sacky one of that wins you the game. It's a sacky one of that enables you to see something else.
yeah,
And leaving it at one, I think will actually basically do the same thing as banning it for
yeah,
certain strategies.
yeah. Yeah, because right now I run it at 1 on my Master Duel deck, and I almost never see it. So I'm like, if we take that approach, I'll be fine with it in the TCG. It's like I'm not just saying that because I don't own Prosperity in real life, but I mean, the car is pretty insane. But
All right,
the
bring
main
back Kid Close.
kit.
Bring back Kid
Okay,
Close. I
so
think.
mhm.
I think. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say like, okay, so this is I don't know if you see Full Metal Alchemist, but you have to give something in exchange for Kit Kalos. I feel
Oh,
like
equivalent
yeah,
exchange.
equivalent in exchange. I feel like this is especially like that scenario where like I feel like Konami would be willing to bring it back to 1, but something would have to go. I'm not sure what would have to go.
Like
Uh,
what?
like maybe one of like Muriel, Sharon, or Halfness.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think
And
so?
No, I think that the spot that Tyr is in the TCG
Mm-hmm.
is not a great one. I think that decks Tyr is a strong deck that, if left unimpeded, even if it gets hand trapped once or twice, can still set up stuff.
Yeah.
But it's still a leg behind other decks, and I think personally, bringing back Kit to 1 is a fine thing to do. Now,
Okay.
people could be like, well, what about Master Duel? And you can say, well, realistically speaking, Master Duel didn't hit Kit directly.
Okay.
It did, but, like they banned Merly
Yeah.
because of Elf.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, they should have just banned Elf because everything else would have been fine. But
Yeah.
I think if you bring back Kit to 1, Kit will actually be the thing that enables Tier to be close to meta, like really, really meta relevant again. Now, you could say, okay, well, then you need to play, like, you need to limit Sulliek. Sure. If you want to limit Sulliek because, you know,
Yeah.
you get Kit back, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead. Like I'll mill 8 any day of the week if it means that I take my trap card that's Rhoda and I put it to 1. Like, oh boy, oh no. Like every other card in my deck is not some random one of.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting to see like how it would stack up, like tier limit versus the current meta if they had Kid back to 1. It would definitely
Yeah,
be interesting.
I think putting Kit back to 1 is a very,
Yeah.
it's a positive for the deck that's only been taking L's this whole time.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
Is there anything else on this list that we might have accidentally forgot?
um. Let me see. Anything else?
But we got a lot.
Yeah, we got a lot.
I think Zeus should be limited.
Zeus should be
It's
limited.
not going to happen. That's just a personal preference. Zeus won't get limited, but I think it should because of you know Zoo coming back. Zoo's
Yeah.
not the main offender, but I think Zeus should just be limited because of how good of a card it is. Um, I don't think there's anything.
Talents.
No, talents is fine.
That's fine.
I don't. I think some people may have a problem with talents just because of other parts, but I don't think talents is a big enough card right now to warrant that kind of like attention. Oh, I also was talking to some friends, some of the goons, and I think Unchained is going to get hit on this coming list, but not in a big way. It's going to get a consistency hit of some kind. I don't know the deck well enough to know which is the best card to hit,
Mm-hmm.
but I think because of what Unchained has been doing, especially since we have 4 YCSs this coming month, that if Unchained keeps doing well, that it's probably going to get hit. Not for it being unfair, but it just needs a consistency hit of some kind. And
Yeah.
I think a couple of people could agree with that because overall the deck is kind of fair, but at the same time it needs a consistency hit of some kind for a deck that's actually topping and topping and topping more and more now.
Yeah. Yeah. That one and the Chimera deck. I was looking at one of M. Cole's videos, and I think the Chimera deck had the most first place winnings regionals like this past weekend. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think Chimera also needs something, but I think Chimera is a little too new for them to hit. I don't know if
Yeah.
Chimera is inherently doing anything super unfair, um, from what I've seen, but I think if you just make if you just enable the deck to be more interactive and less blowouty in the form of things like Gimmick Puppet, which they're probably not even playing anyways,
Yeah.
that I think it's okay to leave it as it is for right now.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think we touched everything that we wanted to touch yet. So hopefully we don't get chewed out in the comments, but like the
Oh, boo
usual.
hoo! Cry
Nah,
about it.
yeah, cry about it.
Cry
Uh,
about it.
but all
I
right
mean,
then.
again, this is not going to happen. Like this
Yeah,
list is just because of this reasoning, I think this card can come back to X spot. But like, not all of this is going to happen. But realistically speaking, if all of this were to happen, I don't think the game's going to change so much that it really looks that different from what it is right now. Like
Yeah.
the game's gonna look the same amount of diverse. Maybe it might not be the same decks, but it's going to be the same level of diverse.
Yeah.
It's going to be the same kind of Yu-Gi-Oh. It's not going to be some kind of super oppressive tier 0 meta. It's going to look the same kind of thing.
You're right about that. But all right, appreciate it, Christian. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.